A young boy was reincarnated into a fantasy world known as Asfial, a realm brimming with wonders beyond imagination. In this magical land, dragons soared through the skies, adventurers clashed in epic battles, and spells were cast like scenes from a fairy tale. It was everything the boy had ever dreamed of as a child. His new life in this extraordinary world had just begun, or so he believed. Despite the enchanting sights, Asfiel lacked the comforts he had once taken for granted. There were no baths, no proper meals, and certainly no electricity. The civilization resembled something out of the medieval age, far removed from the convenience of the modern world he had left behind. As he lay in bed, disappointment settled in. What he once thought was paradise began to feel like a downgrade. Bro got Isekai'd and realized too late it didn't come with plumbing. He turned his eyes toward the glowing moon outside his window, longing for the freedom to move between worlds at will. In that moment, a portal materialized before him, swirling with mysterious energy. The boy stared in awe, sensing the awakening of a power deep within him. It was the Moon Gate. Dimensional travel, his unique ability. With it, he could traverse countless worlds, each with its own rules and wonders. He journeyed through lands dominated by dinosaurs, others ruled by futuristic machines, and realms beyond human understanding. Eventually, he found himself standing in a place that felt familiar: Japan. He was now a young man, and it had been over a decade since he'd seen it. He never imagined he'd return. Just then, an old man noticed him and approached, curious about the stranger's presence. Caught off guard, the young man struggled to explain himself. Instead, the man extended an offer of lunch. During the meal, the young man found himself overwhelmed with emotion. It had been years since he'd last tasted soba, and the simple dish moved him to tears. It was then that the man made an observation. The young man, though clearly not Japanese, spoke with a perfect accent. Confused, the boy looked into a nearby mirror and was met with a reflection that was no longer his own. Golden hair, green eyes, a face foreign to the one he remembered. Somewhere along the way, his appearance had changed, yet his speech remained fluent. He suspected this was another effect of his skill. From that point forward, the boy began to travel frequently between worlds. One discovery stood out: no living being besides him could pass through the Moon Gate. However, non-living objects could. That realization opened a door to possibilities far beyond mere exploration. He saw opportunity in the differences between the two worlds. In Japan, a gold nugget could buy a mansion. In Asfiel, it barely amounted to a month's wage. On the flip side, spices and sweets held immense value in Asfiel. A single luxurious cake could fetch the price of a house. With that in mind, the young man began to envision a new purpose, not as an adventurer, but as a merchant between worlds. He would bring goods from Japan into Asfiel, and in doing so, create a fortune. Life in Asfiel may have lacked convenience, but with the right strategy, he could afford every comfort he desired, even a trip to a proper bathhouse. One day, an old woman approached the young man and thanked him for his help, noting how much the elderly villagers appreciated his kindness. As a token of gratitude, she handed him some money. He accepted it with genuine appreciation, even cheerfully declaring that he would spend it all on sweets. The woman was amused and surprised, asking if he truly loved sweets that much. The young man proudly confirmed it before politely excusing himself. Of course, he couldn't admit that he planned to resell the money's value in another world, so he said nothing more. Now it was time to begin his journey as a merchant. Later, the young man, whose name was Alan, returned to Asfiel. He handed a piece of chocolate to a local merchant named Albert. Curious, Albert asked where Alan had gotten such a treat, but Alan remained vague and instead asked whether nobles might be interested in buying it. Albert responded that nobles would absolutely be drawn to it, and many would be captivated by such a luxurious sweet. It was clear Alan sought Albert's assistance, and though Albert admitted he had no direct ties to the nobility, he suggested that he might be able to connect Alan to someone who did. Still, something seemed to trouble Albert. Alan noticed and asked if there was a problem. Specifically, if selling to nobles might be an issue. Albert explained the risks. Going directly to nobles could draw all kinds of unwanted attention. Other merchants might not take kindly to someone bypassing the usual networks. In noble society, sweets weren't just treats. They were symbols of power, gifts in political dealings, and signs of wealth. As a result, merchants often organized themselves, managing farmers and confectioners collectively. Violating these unspoken agreements could invite backlash. But Alan, not seeing the big picture, merely commented that Albert's shop was small because of his fear of those said merchants. The remark irked Albert, although he conceded that Alan wasn't entirely wrong. A small-time merchant like himself could never stand toe-to-toe with those serving the elite. Albert's really out here fearing the dessert cartel. Albert eventually told Alan that he would have to find another merchant if he wanted to sell chocolates. Though slightly disappointed, Alan respected the decision. But he wasn't giving up entirely, just shifting gears. He already had another product in mind. Albert, on the other hand, was taken aback by Alan's relentless enthusiasm for sales. Alan clarified that he merely wanted Albert's professional opinion. Before they could continue, two mothers walked into the shop, delighted to see them. Alan greeted them casually and asked if they were out shopping. One of the mothers expressed surprise at seeing him there and quickly took interest in the item he was holding, asking what it was. Alan simply said it was an exotic sweet he had come across. The girl then asked if he intended to become a merchant, to which he replied that he was merely curious about the trade. Albert, realizing this was an ideal moment to test the product's appeal, encouraged Alan to let the mothers try the sweets. Alan hesitated, worried about giving away too much, but Albert didn't seem concerned. A lack of caution that in Alan's mind explained why Albert's shop had remained small. Alan handed the sweets to the mothers, who accepted them eagerly. As expected, they found them delicious and immediately wanted to buy more. Before leaving, they promised to spread the word, which left Alan feeling both excited and mildly pressured. Turning back to Albert, Alan looked apologetic for promoting his product inside someone else's store. But Albert was unimpressed. He told Alan rather bluntly to take his business elsewhere. At that moment, Alan realized that every last one of his products had been sold. Albert considered it a decent result, but Alan paid it little mind, believing the success was thanks to the mothers who helped out. Still, he couldn't shake the thought that if only the chocolates had sold instead, he might have been sitting on a small fortune by now. The potential value gnawed at him, a sharp reminder of what could have been. Albert, grounded as ever, mentally warned against underestimating the trade. Alan, recognizing the support he'd received, offered his thanks before departing. He then left behind the unsold chocolates as a token of appreciation. Though Albert tried to stop him, Alan continued on his way, leaving Albert thinking that perhaps the young man had more potential at this field than he initially thought. Later that day, Alan made his way to a bathhouse. The warm water was a rare comfort, a momentary escape from the uncertainties that weighed on him. Without a registered identity in Asfiel, his options remained limited. He couldn't rent a place to stay, hold a stable job, or pull himself out of this cycle of poverty. Yet, even with all that hanging over him, the bath lifted his spirits. In that brief moment of relaxation, a new sense of hope emerged. Selling sweets hadn't made him wealthy, but it confirmed something vital. Japanese goods held value in this world. The challenge now was figuring out what to sell and how to navigate the unfamiliar marketplace. The merchants here operated under their own systems, bound by rules he had yet to understand. There was still much to learn. Later on, he found himself at a local pub. The alcohol served there was surprisingly good, adding to the quiet luxuries of the day. Coming right after the bathhouse visit, the drink felt well earned. But before long, the atmosphere shifted. The noise died down as silence swept across the room. A group of girls had entered, drawing everyone's attention. The sudden change in mood was undeniable. Whispers rippled through the crowd, identifying one of them as the Black Princess. Her presence in the town came as a shock to the patrons. Alan, watching from his seat, began to wonder. She was like him, a transfer who might be from Japan, someone capable of moving between worlds. So, she's the Black Princess, but is Japanese? In Asfiel, individuals with unusual origins weren't as rare as one might expect. Every town had at least one or two. Those born in this world but who retained memories from a past life were known as reincarnators. Those who appeared from another world entirely were referred to as transfers. Both types were often gifted with heightened physical or magical capabilities, and many received blessings called skills. As a result, they frequently became adventurers, researchers, or merchants dealing in magical disciplines. This was Alan's first time encountering someone else who shared his circumstances. Around him, the whispers continued. The Black Princess, despite the rumors, was far more beautiful than many expected. She was the leader of the Crimson Moon Brigade, an all-female group of adventurers. Not just eye-catching, she was known for defeating powerful monsters and earning the trust of both nobles and influential merchants. Still, to Alan, seeing her in person stirred not admiration but intimidation. Not long after, Alan stood up to ask for the bill. The owner was surprised that he was leaving so early, as it was unusual for him to stop at just one drink. Alan only smiled, explaining that something had come up. Later on, Alan made a trip back to Japan to stock up on supplies. One of his key purchases was a set of manga. At the store, he relied on the guidance of the cashier, Kida, to confirm which titles were currently trending. Alan wasn't up to date with the latest hits, but Kida, being a manga enthusiast himself, helped him choose the top title from the weekly shonen camp. Along with the manga, Alan also grabbed a women's fashion magazine. When asked about it, he claimed someone had asked him to pick it up. After paying, he promptly left the store. The truth was actually different. No one had asked him for anything. Approaching the Black Princess directly had felt too risky at the time, but he strongly suspected she was a transfer, someone like him. And unlike the others, Asfiel had little in terms of entertainment, so he hoped that these manga could serve as a bridge. The purchase was costly, especially for someone in his situation, and all he could do now was hope his gamble would pay off. Once back in Asfiel, Alan made his way to the place where he intended to deliver the manga. But things didn't go as planned. The restaurant was closed to the public due to a private event, and its windows were completely shuttered. Rumor had it the Black Princess was inside. If he missed this chance, there might not be another. Leaving could make him seem suspicious, but standing around might only worsen the impression. While he was hesitating, one of the girls from the Crimson Moon Brigade took notice. She spotted him loitering near the entrance and called him out. Seizing the opportunity, Alan explained that he had something to give to the Black Princess. He handed her the manga, stressing that it was a gift, free of charge. If it wasn't needed, she could simply discard it. Without waiting for a reaction, Alan quickly took his leave. Although confused, the girl decided to take the package inside. Within the restaurant, another member of the Crimson Moon Brigade, Kalkira, called out to the girl from outside, Aina, asking what the item was. Upon hearing that it came from some weirdo outside for the Black Princess, Kalkira inspected it carefully. After confirming that it wasn't laced with poison or equipped with any kind of dangerous magic, Aina handed it over to the Black Princess. Upon receiving the package, the Black Princess showed hesitation, unsure whether to open it. Aina, who had delivered it, offered reassurance, mentioning that the person who handed it over claimed she could discard it if she wasn't interested. With that, the Black Princess opened the package. Inside were several books. At first glance, Aina found them to be ordinary in appearance, but their presence was certainly unusual. She couldn't understand why such items were specifically addressed to their captain. Then, without warning, the Black Princess frantically asked who had given the package. In her previous life, the girl now known as the Black Princess had been running for her life, chased into the woods by a frantic mob calling her a Miko. Confusion clouded her mind, but she kept running. Moments earlier, she had simply been waiting to be picked up from school, but in an instant her surroundings warped. Without warning, she had been pulled into another world. Before she could comprehend what was happening, she was falling, plunging into an abyss. As darkness closed in, she surrendered to her fate, her final thoughts drifting to her father. But death never came. Instead, she awoke in an unfamiliar world. A couple stood by her side, relieved to see her regain consciousness. Alarmed, she questioned who they were. Noticing her unease, the woman gently apologized and explained that they were innkeepers. They had found her collapsed at the base of a cliff. The Black Princess confirmed that she indeed fell. When she asked if they had saved her, they deflected the credit, saying her survival was thanks to her own strength. Surviving such a fall was, according to them, something only a Miko could do. Still unfamiliar with the term, she asked what a Miko was. The couple explained that Mikos were divine messengers, beings from another world, marked by traits like black hair and blessed with unknown powers. Though she didn't yet understand her own abilities, the signs were there. Overwhelmed, she admitted that none of it made sense. The woman then handed her a warm cup of tea, advising her to rest first and make sense of everything later. Taking that advice to heart, she drank the tea and slowly calmed her thoughts. Once her strength returned, she expressed her gratitude and prepared to leave. The couple wished her well, and she returned the sentiment. From that moment, she began her journey, determined to find a way back to her own world. With her powers as a Miko, she managed to travel safely, never encountering danger despite being alone. But as stories of her presence spread, people began to gather around her. In time, the Crimson Moon Brigade came into being, a band that followed her loyally. Looking back, she realized how fortunate she was to have met such companions. They never asked about her purpose. They simply believed in her. She also hoped that one day she could tell them everything. In the present, the Black Princess visited the pub where Alan had been. She approached him, asking if he was the one who had sent the mysterious package. Alan greeted her with a smile and asked Zian, the pub's owner, to serve her a drink. As the pub neared closing time, Zian reminded Alan to lock up before leaving. They sat with one seat between them, the silence heavy. Alan broke it, admitting the awkwardness but explaining that this conversation was best kept private, something only shared between kindred souls. He asked if she was Japanese and she confirmed it, revealing that she was a reincarnator. When Alan asked her name, she introduced herself as Shizuku Sayoji, who was turning 18 that year. She then asked for his name, and Alan responded with a light introduction of his own, saying he was just a 20-year-old without a job. Shizuku asked for Alan's name from his original world, to which he replied that it was Masato Shinjo, a regular man who had been 25 when he died. Though she apologized for asking something so personal, Alan reassured her that it was fine. Shizuku then noticed something odd. Alan hadn't reacted to the name Sayoji. This suggested that the other transfers he had met might have been from a different time entirely. When Alan asked if she had been famous or perhaps even an idol, Shizuku realized he truly had no clue about her former life. Alan went on to speculate that they may have come from different timelines. Based on his own estimate, 20 years had passed since his death. Yet the Japanese base, with its distinctly Showa-era aesthetic, didn't quite reflect that passage of time. In that moment, Shizuku's interest spiked. She wanted to know more about his ability to return to Japan. She tried to press for details, but Alan quickly shut down the idea. According to him, bringing another living person across worlds was impossible. However, he could transfer objects and even deliver goods directly to her. He tried to lighten the mood by suggesting it wasn't such a bad arrangement. Shizuku didn't respond, her thoughts heavy, until Alan insisted she have another drink. With no bartender around, Alan brought out a bottle of tea from Japan. Though unsure if she would enjoy it, Shizuku accepted and took a sip. When Alan asked for her opinion, she smiled and told him it was delicious. Watching her, Alan was momentarily struck by how mature she seemed, and it was hard to believe she was only 18. Sensing her vulnerability, Shizuku apologized for showing such a raw side of herself. Alan assured her it was nothing to be ashamed of, admitting that he himself had once cried over eating soba after reincarnating. Shizuku, unfamiliar with the dish, piqued Alan's curiosity. He promised to bring some for her the next time he returned to Japan. Though she still hoped for a clue that could help her find her way home, this small comfort was a welcome consolation. Just then, Shizuku offered to sponsor Alan. In return, she requested that he procure specific items for her. Alan was caught off guard but agreed, warning her not to go overboard since he lacked both a stable income and legal identity in this world. Shizuku replied by offering to draft a letter on his behalf. She then asked if he was any good at organizing documents. The next morning, Shizuku was up early, waking the members of the Crimson Moon Brigade. She had an announcement to make. Alan would be joining them as their newest member. Alan really walked into a guild and accidentally joined a girl group. The revelation sparked an immediate reaction. Aina, startled, recognized him as the weird man from the other day and questioned if Shizuku was truly serious. However, Shizuku affirmed her decision, stating plainly that she trusted him. Alan, meanwhile, lingered cautiously at the doorway, fully expecting a reception like this. As the room processed the news, one of the girls stepped forward to question Shizuku again, voicing concern over Alan being a man. Shizuku clarified that Alan wouldn't be accompanying them on the field. Instead, he'd be working behind the scenes assigned to logistics. Without missing a beat, she appointed Aina as Alan's trainer, an announcement that immediately drew protest from the reluctant girl. Later that day, the two met for the so-called training session. Aina, clearly still uneasy, broke the silence with a question. She asked how Alan managed to earn the captain's interest, noting she had never seen Shizuku that enthusiastic before. Alan admitted it took some effort, but in the end it worked out, even if he hadn't expected to join the brigade himself. Meanwhile, Aina couldn't help but reflect on how unusual the situation was. In all their history, never had a man joined the Crimson Moon Brigade. Aina quickly pushed aside her earlier doubts, remarking that the extra manpower would be helpful regardless. Alan then asked if she'd really been handling all the brigade's logistics on her own, and she confirmed it, explaining that she and Shizuku were the only ones capable of reading and doing basic math. The weight of the task began to settle in on Alan, knowing that managing supplies for over 30 people was no small feat. Aina then laid out the plan. She would take care of stock checks while Alan would be in charge of restocking. She also mentioned that the Crimson Moon Brigade's name alone should be enough to keep merchants from charging him unfairly. Before he set out, Alan reminded her not to overwork herself. Later that day, Alan began his errands, still in disbelief over how everything had turned out. Originally, the plan was to become a merchant connected to the Crimson Moon Brigade, someone who could trade freely with nobles. Instead, he had ended up as one of their own. Now that he was part of the team, he knew he had to prove himself if he wanted to earn the trust of the other members. As he passed by Albert's shop, a group of familiar mothers called out to him, waving him over. They wasted no time confirming the rumor of whether he really joined the Crimson Moon Brigade. Alan was taken aback that the news had already reached them. The mothers laughed, explaining that gossip travels fast, and then teasingly asked if there was something going on between him and the Black Princess. Flustered, Alan quickly denied it, saying she had only been interested in the goods he sold. He was just an added bonus. Still, the speed of the rumors left him uneasy. One of the mothers mentioned how much she had enjoyed the sweets he brought last time, while another offered her congratulations and wished him luck in his new role. Alan responded with a sheepish laugh, saying he was only running errands for now. Then one of the mothers told him to visit her shop more often, promising him a discount. Shocked by the generous offer, Alan asked if she was really serious. After picking up some of the supplies, he realized just how much he owed these women and quietly noted that he couldn't thank them enough. That's when he heard someone shouting his name from the crowd. Turning around, he found himself surrounded by a small group of people, all excited to see him. Word had clearly spread fast, and now several townsfolk were offering their support and even supplies. The unexpected outpouring of kindness overwhelmed him. Caught in the emotion of it all, Alan couldn't hold it in any longer and let out a joyful scream. Later that day, Aina thanked Alan for his help and asked if he had finished his shopping run. Alan confirmed that he had and handed over the invoices, though he kept himself half hidden around the corner. Curious, Ina asked why he was acting so suspicious, so Alan explained that he was just being cautious. When Ina scanned the invoice, her expression changed instantly. Alarmed, Alan asked if he had gone over budget, but Ina quickly clarified that it was the opposite. The total cost was 20% lower than usual. Suspicious of the unusually low price, she questioned if Alan had done anything shady. Alan firmly denied it, explaining that he simply received goodwill discounts from a few acquaintances. He even told her to check with the merchants herself if she had any doubts. Hearing this, Ina relaxed and said there was no need to interrogate anyone. As she made her way to the door, she turned back with a smile, telling Alan he had done a good job. Later on, Alan returned to Japan, carrying with him a letter from Shizuku. As he looked at it, he couldn't help but wonder if it would truly make a difference. The Crimson Moon Brigade finally arrived at the royal capital, with Alan traveling alongside them. Shizuku acknowledged the group's hard work throughout their long journey and informed them that Lineberg would now serve as their new base of operations. Their team house had already been arranged, and everyone was instructed to find their assigned rooms and settle in. As the group dispersed, Shizuku pulled Alan aside. She asked him to return to Japan once he had completed his current responsibilities. Alan didn't mind, but asked if she needed something in particular. Shizuku replied vaguely, saying she didn't need any supplies this time and that Alan would understand once he got there. She didn't elaborate, turning away without offering further explanation. Before fully leaving, though, she reminded him to pick up the next volume of Dream Love, a manga she clearly adored. Later, Alan arrived in Japan, only to find the village in a state of commotion. The old man he had once met, Genji, greeted him warmly, commenting on how long it had been. Curious, Alan asked about the gathering, and Genji explained that the people were from the Saioji group. Apparently, they had been searching for Alan for over a week, much to Genji's confusion, especially since Alan had never heard of them before. Seeing no point in hiding, Alan decided to approach the group. As he neared, he spotted a car and a young woman seated inside. She asked if he was Alan, and once he confirmed it, she invited him into the car, noting how hot it was outside. Inside the vehicle, the unfamiliar woman casually commented on the difficulty of finding him. She also complained about the lack of decent cigarettes in the area. Alan offered an apology but quickly realized he didn't even know her name. She introduced herself as Akira Kamiki, telling him to call her Akira. When Alan asked if her search had something to do with Shizuku's letter, Akira suddenly slammed the car door shut. Her demeanor shifted, and it became clear that Alan's response had confirmed her suspicions. Without hesitation, Akira radioed her team, announcing that the target had been secured and requesting backup. As tension filled the air, she warned Alan to cooperate if he wanted to remain unharmed. Her piercing gaze and chilling words made it clear she wasn't bluffing. Forced into submission, Alan had no choice but to go along with whatever was about to unfold. During the ride, he asked what the Saioji group actually was. Akira explained that it was a sprawling corporate empire, deeply rooted in real estate and other crucial industries both in Japan and abroad. It functioned like a powerful zaibatsu, and its origins could be traced back to one of Kyoto's wealthiest families. Under the leadership of Ryugen Saioji, Shizuku's father, it had grown into a major conglomerate. Akira also revealed that her family, the Kamikis, had served the Saiyojis for generations. She herself had been by Shizuku's side since middle school. But 3 years ago, coinciding with the start of her full-time position at the estate, she began to notice that something wasn't right. There was a time when Akira served tea to Shizuku, and the girl complimented her for it. Akira responded with the usual courtesy, but Shizuku reminded her not to be so formal when it was just the two of them. Just then, Shizuku casually brought up the Dream Love anime and asked if Akira had recorded the latest episode, to which she said yes. Shizuku then wondered if Akira planned to stay the night, suggesting they watch it together. Amused, Akira agreed to the idea without protest. But then, everything changed. One day, as Akira waited for Shizuku to return home, she was met with the devastating news that Shizuku had gone missing. It was abrupt and baffling. Akira demanded answers, questioning the guards and how such a disappearance could happen under their watch. Denial clouded her thoughts, convinced it had to be a mistake. Yet when they checked the surveillance systems, nothing unusual was found. Shizuku had vanished without a trace. Even now, the search continued. Specialist teams had been dispatched globally, yet every trail led to a dead end. With no leads and no breakthroughs, Akira turned to Alan, hoping he held the answers. They eventually reached their destination. Akira stepped out of the vehicle, offering an apology for the deception earlier, then urged Alan to get straight to the point. As they entered the massive structure looming before them, Alan was stunned. He hadn't imagined that such a facility existed near the quiet Akane village. Soon after, Akira knocked on a grand office door and announced their arrival before the chairman. Inside, Ryugen Saioji, the head of the Saioji family, greeted Alan. recognizing him from the contents of a letter his daughter had once written. Alan was immediately overwhelmed by the man's sheer presence, wondering if all men of such status exuded the same aura. Ryugen, however, quickly reassured him that he knew Alan wasn't responsible for Shizuku's disappearance. The letter, written in a unique cipher only known within the family, was proof that both the sender and its message were authentic. It meant that Shizuku was still alive and that she trusted Alan. Curious, Alan asked how they had tracked him down despite his lack of a permanent address or employment. Ryugen explained that the postmark on the letter had helped narrow their search, and the letter itself contained a detailed description of Alan. He then expressed admiration for him. Just as Akira had mentioned, Shizuku had vanished 3 years ago even while surrounded by dozens of guards. The circumstances were impossible to make sense of. But then the letter came, stating that she had found an ally and needed support. Now, Ryugen needed to hear everything Alan knew. Before continuing, Alan asked if the room had any surveillance systems in place. Ryugen assured him it didn't, and that the room was tightly secured, with even the windows fitted with one-way mirrors. Then, Alan decided to show him the truth instead. As he activated his power, Akira instinctively aimed her gun at him, but Ryugen quickly ordered all weapons lowered. Before them, a portal appeared, a moon gate, summoned by Alan's abilities. He explained that the gate was a link to another world and that Shizuku was on the other side. Ryugen was stunned. He asked about the conditions required to use the gate. Alan admitted that he didn't have all the answers, but what he did know was this. Aside from himself, only non-living things could pass through it. Ryugen, still skeptical yet intrigued, asked if he could touch the moon gate. With Alan's permission, he reached out, his fingers brushing against the glowing portal. He questioned if his daughter was truly on the other side. Alan confirmed it without hesitation, revealing that Shizuku now lived in a fantasy realm, leading a group of adventurers. It was a claim too fantastical for Ryugen to accept at face value, but the very existence of the moon gate left little room for denial. Akira, still cautious, questioned Ryugen's belief in Alan's story. Ryugen admitted that he remained doubtful because it all sounded like something out of a fairy tale. Still, he had a simple request. He handed Alan a smartphone and asked him to take a photo of Shizuku as proof. Though unfamiliar with the sleek modern device, Alan accepted the task. Ryugen assured him that Akira would handle the instructions. Meanwhile, Alan was in awe of the device because it looked far from the flip phones he once knew. Ryugen then made it clear that he still questioned Alan's intentions, uncertain how much truth or deception lay in his words. But the letter was real, written in a family cipher only they understood. Alan's delivery of it couldn't be ignored. With that, Ryugen extended a hand in gratitude, asking him to pass along his regards to Shizuku. Alan accepted the gesture, silently agreeing to the terms. Soon after, Alan returned to the fantasy realm of Asfiel and reunited with Shizuku. As she quietly sipped her tea, he informed her of his recent encounter with her father. He hadn't expected Ryugen to show up personally, much less with an entire entourage arriving in the rural village where Alan resided. Frustration bubbled up as he felt the whole situation had been excessive. But Shizuku calmly reminded him that at the time, she was the sole heir to the family. Alan dropped the subject knowing she wasn't wrong. He then brought out the smartphone Ryugen had given him and explained its purpose, which was to serve as proof of her existence. Shizuku took the device with ease, revealing a surprising level of proficiency. As she explored the phone, she stumbled upon a video, a message prepared by Ryugen. Alan, watching from nearby, was impressed by the clarity of the footage, almost as if it were in ultra-high definition. Shizuku, however, was visibly moved. Tears welled in her eyes as she watched the screen, and Alan, realizing the intimacy of the moment, felt a hint of guilt for observing. Before she could hand the phone back, Shizuku noticed Alan had vanished. She found him downstairs, casually interacting with the other girls. He explained that it was a good time to introduce them to the smartphone, and with Shizuku's permission, the group quickly became excited. They insisted on taking a photo together, even pulling Shizuku into the impromptu gathering. Though caught off guard, she agreed. Alan gathered everyone and snapped the photo, capturing a rare moment of unity. Afterward, Aina approached Alan. She commented on how he seemed to be settling into life with the brigade. Alan wasn't so sure, as he still hadn't formed strong bonds with everyone. Aina reassured him that there was no rush, especially since adjusting to the new base took time. She then brought up the Royal Capital Street Festival, piquing his interest. She explained that the event was held every weekend in the capital, drawing merchants from across the land. The festival featured a wide range of goods, from everyday trinkets to luxurious items meant for nobles. Since the brigade wasn't set to resume their adventuring anytime soon, Aina encouraged him to pay it a visit. That's when Alan asked whether he would be allowed to set up a stall of his own. Alan had successfully secured an application for the street festival, but one problem remained. He had no idea what to sell. His thoughts were soon interrupted by the arrival of Camille, Luca, and Lazuli, members of the Crimson Moon Brigade. Camille greeted him with her usual cheer, immediately questioning what he was up to. When Alan mentioned he'd be heading out, Camille jumped to conclusions, teasing that he might be running away. Caught off guard, Alan admitted that part of him thought staying might just make things awkward for everyone. However, the girls quickly shut that idea down. None of them held any resentment toward him anymore. Lazuli in particular took a moment to apologize for how things started, explaining that their initial hostility came from past experiences with men. Luca chimed in, noting that they were actually thankful for Alan's presence, especially because their captain seemed lighter and more at ease since he had arrived. Lazuli went on to say that anyone who could contribute to the brigade was welcome. Camille agreed, mentioning that even Aina liked him. She then mentioned that he saw him more as a father figure. That claim sparked a mini debate, as the others argued that Alan felt more like a brother than anything else. Listening to their playful banter, Alan felt reassured that finally he was beginning to feel accepted. Lazuli soon redirected the conversation back to his earlier task, asking what he was working on. Alan explained that he was filling out paperwork for the upcoming festival, planning to set up a small stall. The girls were surprised, curious about what he'd be selling. Alan confessed he hadn't decided yet. His current idea involved sweets targeted toward nobles. Still, he struggled to come up with more options. The girls quickly dove into brainstorming mode. Lazuli darted to the bookshelf and returned with one of Shizuku's favorite manga volumes. She excitedly suggested selling the books at the festival. The others lit up at the idea, thrilled by the prospect of having access to more volumes if Alan bought a batch. Meanwhile, Alan was skeptical. It seemed like Lazuli's suggestion came from a place of self-interest more than business savvy. He was also caught off guard by the fact that the girls could read Japanese. Still, he had to admit that entertainment goods could work. It might not be the most cost-effective option, though. Though disappointed by the logistical concerns, the girls perked up again when Alan said he'd stock at least a few copies. That was all they needed to hear. With that settled, they eagerly promised to stop by his stall once the festival began. Later on, Alan made his way to Japan to return the smartphone to Ryugen. Yet even as he approached the task, he wasn't entirely sure if Ryugen had believed the contents he'd submitted. His uncertainty was briefly interrupted when Akira greeted him at the door, announcing that she would be acting as his assistant. Her unusually cheerful demeanor threw him off so much that he shut the door in her face. Afterward, Alan apologized, explaining that he'd simply been startled. He asked her to speak with him as she used to, but she declined. Still, her calm expression was enough to reassure him. Alan then mentioned that it seemed the chairman had accepted the proof he presented. Akira confirmed that Ryugen had been genuinely thrilled. Alongside the photo, the glowing mineral Alan had delivered, luminite, was confirmed to be a completely unknown substance. There was no longer any reason to doubt his story. Without delay, Akira handed him a set of documents and cards, stating that this was the promised support. Among the items were identity and residency papers, details about his assigned living space, which came fully furnished with a PC and other essentials, and a black credit card with no spending limit. She then showed him the balance in his new account, over 100 million yen. She really pulled out the entire Sugar Daddy starter kit. Alan was stunned. Though grateful, he couldn't help but feel that all of it was a bit too much. Akira then laid out two conditions. First, Alan would be expected to cooperate in the research surrounding the gate, as they were eager to understand his abilities and the nature of the other world. Second, and most importantly, he was to provide full support to Shizuku. As she emphasized the second condition, her expression turned sharp and unyielding, leaving Alan no choice but to agree. From that point forward, Akira informed him that she would oversee his security and assist him however necessary. Alan thanked her, then made a request of his own. Not long after, the two ventured into the city to search for entertainment goods. Though Alan could have made the selections himself, he admitted he was out of touch with modern Japan. Akira understood but remained curious about his intentions for opening a shop. Alan then explained that he needed to build connections. Back home, he relied on familiar faces, but this was his first time navigating the capital. Winning over nobles would stabilize his finances and grant the brigade better access to information and resources. Akira found his reasoning puzzling, pointing out that with the resources given to him, wealth was no longer a concern. Alan acknowledged this, but he admitted he wanted to earn his own way. He wasn't content with simply receiving support, and he wanted to build something of his own. Akira found his mindset unexpectedly sincere, and Alan found comfort in that. Akira then asked Alan if he had any plans to stock some items. However, before he could respond, his attention drifted toward a nearby store display filled with trading cards. Intrigued, Alan paused while Akira looked on, puzzled by his interest in them. Alan explained that in Asfiel, entertainment was a rarity. While nobles occasionally indulged in board games, they were often simplistic and uninspired. Trading cards, with their strategy and collectability, might stand out as something new. The only issue was choosing the right ones because many of the titles were unfamiliar to him. Akira then mentioned that the C Group operated across numerous industries, and entertainment was no exception. One of their subsidiaries even specialized in trading cards. Without hesitation, she made a phone call ordering an entire warehouse's worth of crossword puzzles. Alan panicked, urging her not to go overboard. Eventually, he opted to purchase only a few cards, explaining that he wanted to test the waters before committing fully. He thanked Akira for her help and mentioned his plan to look for sweets and books next. Aware that she had her own responsibilities, he told her it was okay not to accompany him, but Akira refused. She insisted on staying by his side, explaining that if anything happened to him, it would break Shizuku's heart. Alan was caught off guard by her straightforwardness. At that moment, he decided to place his full trust in her. Later, as they browsed through more shops, Akira showed Alan a stack of CDs. He was surprised and felt outdated, especially since he'd only known DVDs. It hadn't hit him until now how much the world had changed. Then something on a nearby TV caught his eye, a character from a show he recognized. He asked if it was Dream Love, the series Shizuku adored. At that, he noticed Akira had gone silent. She admitted it made her feel nostalgic. Shizuku had once invited her to watch it together, but the moment never came. Alan, sensing he might have touched a nerve, quickly apologized. But Akira reassured him that that wasn't her intention. She might have missed spending time with Shizuku, but being by her side wasn't the only way to serve her. Akira then offered to buy the CD so Alan could give it to Shizuku as a gift. Shortly after, she suggested compiling all the entertainment, manga, dramas, and more into a single tablet. If the people of Asfiel were craving joy, offering a wide selection would be more effective than a handful of items. As Akira pondered the idea, Alan watched her quietly, smiling to himself. At that moment, she reminded him of an older sister. When Alan returned to Asfiel, the first person to greet him was Lazuli, who quickly informed him that the permit for his festival stall had finally arrived. Wasting no time, he went to check it for himself, feeling a wave of relief that everything had been approved without any issues. As he reviewed the permit, Lazuli leaned in and asked in a hushed tone about the merchandise he was planning to sell. Alan told her that the goods, specifically the manga, would be delivered on the day of the festival, since they had no place to store the shipment at the base beforehand. That answer clearly didn't sit well with Lazuli. She looked genuinely annoyed that she wouldn't be able to get her hands on the manga right away. With a sigh and a hint of bitterness, she muttered that she hoped his stall would fail, just so she could get early access to the next volume. Damn, she really chose violence. Alan found her dramatic reaction more irritating than amusing, but he didn't press the matter. Changing the subject, Alan asked when Luca and the others were expected to arrive. Lazuli said they'd be coming in the evening, though she herself would show up a bit later with Camille because she still had a few tasks to wrap up. As the conversation shifted, she casually asked where Alan's booth would be set up, noting that it seemed like he was aiming for a wealthier audience. Alan answered that he had selected booth 13, located along the West Main Street. That response took Lazuli by surprise. She pointed out that the West Main Street was no ordinary location. It was prime real estate, typically reserved for the capital's most experienced merchants. Even more notable was its close proximity to the Central District, a place known for being sealed off from the rest of the city. According to Lazuli, the Central District was home to the highest-ranking nobles in the capital. It was heavily restricted, and most commoners rarely if ever laid eyes on the people who lived there. However, there were rumors that a few eccentric nobles occasionally snuck out to experience the street festival. If Alan's booth was truly that close to the Central District, he might end up catching the attention of someone far above the usual customer base. Still, Lazuli emphasized that all of this was just speculation. Alan didn't seem fazed by this. In fact, it made Lazuli suspect he had aimed for that exact booth on purpose. Alan neither confirmed nor denied it, simply leaving it to her imagination. Lazuli suddenly burst out laughing, which caught Alan off guard. When he asked why, she brushed it off, saying he was just very interesting. He wasn't sure if that was a compliment or sarcasm. Lazuli, confused by his reaction, eventually excused herself, saying she was looking forward to the festival. Once she left, Alan was left with a lingering sense of unease. But with the preparations finally complete, all that remained was to wait for the festival. Whatever would happen, he reminded himself, would happen. When the festival day finally arrived, the streets of Asfiel came alive with movement and excitement. Alan set up his booth, mentally assuring himself that all preparations were complete and that it was time to put his plans into action. Alongside the main goods, he had brought a small selection of books, though he intended to be selective about who he sold them to. His primary focus was chocolate, with trading cards included as a test. While the true crowds were expected to come in the evening, the morning already saw a decent turnout, mostly composed of upper-class individuals. The nearby booths offered high-end merchandise, but Alan believed his products could stand their ground. He was determined to make the most of the opportunity. As time passed, however, reality began to chip away at his confidence. Visitors walked by without stopping. No one seemed interested in his products. While the surrounding stalls buzzed with activity, his remained untouched. He couldn't help but question whether his products were too niche or if the problem was him. Life really gave him an expectation versus reality moment. It was then that Albert appeared, noting Alan's gloomy expression. Surprised, Alan asked what he was doing in the capital, and Albert explained that he was there for business. Upon discovering the festival, he decided to drop by, though he hadn't expected to see Alan as a merchant. With a teasing remark about Alan's booming business, it felt to Alan like Albert had shown up just to mock him. Albert denied this, and in a surprising turn, offered some advice despite their status as business rivals. He pointed out that unfamiliar goods, especially food, were a tough sell. Free samples might help, but given the clientele, most wouldn't eat them out in the open. Alan was disheartened to hear this, but he knew Albert was right. Albert continued, suggesting that Alan might have better luck targeting the middle class in future festivals, which were held every week. Though Alan accepted the advice, it clearly weighed on him. Noticing this, Albert encouraged him not to give up, reminding him that the afternoon crowd still lay ahead. In the world of business, he said, two things mattered most: quality and trust. And Alan had both. Though Albert considered himself a small-time merchant, and his words might not carry weight, Alan didn't see it that way. Although he really did believe his shop was small. Thanks for rubbing that in, bud. As Albert turned to leave, Alan thanked him for the advice. But before walking away completely, Albert paused, telling Alan that he might discover something beyond the original goal he had set for himself. The day stretched on with only a handful of customers dropping by Alan's booth. Sales were far from impressive, and Alan decided that once Luca and the others arrived, he'd close up early. While waiting, his thoughts drifted back to Albert's words. He had already begun to earn money and chase success, so the idea of finding something beyond his goal puzzled him. Suddenly, a stir swept through the crowd as a striking figure made his entrance into the festival. Judging by his regal demeanor and appearance, he was clearly no ordinary citizen. The young man was none other than the heir to the Castellano Marquesate, instantly drawing attention from everyone around. Alan watched him closely, suspecting the noble had come incognito to browse the booths in person. The rumors were true then. Nobles really did visit the festival. With that knowledge, Alan braced himself and stayed alert. Then, to his surprise, the young noble made his way to Alan's stall and inquired about the merchandise. Alan explained that he sold rare items from different regions, specializing in confections and recreational games. He showcased his chocolates, noting their strong aroma and offering the noble a sample. However, the young man's guard immediately stepped in, trying to stop the tasting. The noble, unfazed, waved off the concern, confident that he could handle any fallout. Alan, sensing the subtle tension, could tell the guards weren't pleased. Intrigued, the noble asked more about the chocolates. Alan explained the process. Cacao beans ground and mixed with sugar and vanilla, then hardened into form. To prove their safety, Alan took a piece himself and instructed the noble to hold it by the wrapper since it melted with body heat. Following Alan's advice, the noble tried the chocolate, chewing thoughtfully. His silence stretched long enough to make Alan anxious, but when he finally spoke, he called it amazing. A quick reminder from his guard not to speak with his mouth full brought a wave of relief to Alan. The noble then asked about the price. Alan responded that a box of 8 cost 30,000 gold. Hearing this, the young man seemed surprised because it was cheaper than expected. Alan explained it was a special introductory price, which the noble found acceptable. Without hesitation, he purchased the entire stock, paying more than the price given to him. He insisted on overpaying as a token of appreciation for the surprise and delight the chocolates brought him. Interested now in Alan's other offerings, the noble examined the rest of the sweets, con peto, caramel, and more, and bought them all with the same enthusiasm. Alan was nearly overwhelmed by the growing pile of gold, while the young noble seemed thrilled to have spent 1 million on sweets alone. Then, his eyes landed on the paper bags, which were the trading cards. Alan explained that each pack contained 5 random cards and that players needed to build decks of 40 to play, with instructions included in a booklet. The noble didn't hesitate. He bought the entire stock on the spot. Though stunned, Alan accepted, still processing the surreal experience. Upon opening a pack, the noble and his guards were impressed by the detailed illustrations. One guard commented on the exceptional quality of the 3,000 gold packs, while another considered buying some himself. Alan listened in disbelief. Everything he had brought was sold out in a single day. He thanked the noble for his patronage, but the boy returned the gratitude, saying the experience had opened his eyes to something new. Before leaving, he asked for Alan's name and he introduced himself humbly. The noble then placed something in Alan's palm and departed, saying he looked forward to seeing him again. Once the noble was gone, Alan looked at his hand. 2 medals. It was, without a doubt, the most unbelievable encounter of his life. Not long after, Camille and Lazuli came rushing in, apologizing for the delay. Upon seeing that everything had already been sold, Camille panicked. Lazuli, equally shocked, remarked that Alan had really pulled it off. They thought they'd arrived quickly yet had missed it all. Camille, sulking, lamented that she was hoping to get the next volume of her favorite manga. To their delight, Alan had saved a copy just for them. The girls playfully scolded him for not saying so earlier, but were already too excited to read it with the captain. Watching them, Alan laughed to himself. As they gushed over the manga, he realized that perhaps this bond was what Albert meant when he spoke of finding something beyond his goal. Later that night, while Alan was immersed in bookkeeping, Shizuku quietly approached him. She asked why he was still working so late, prompting Alan to explain that he wanted to finish organizing his records. In turn, he asked what she was doing awake at that hour, guessing that she had been reading the newest volume of the manga. But Shizuku told him she had only come for a glass of water, and decided to sit beside him to keep him company. As the night deepened, she casually brought up the Royal Capital's Market Festival and asked if anything interesting had happened. Alan, sensing she may have visited the festival herself, kept the details to share later. Out of nowhere, Alan admitted that his original goal in becoming a merchant had always been simple. He just wanted to get rich. It was never meant to be some grand mission or act of service for others. It was supposed to be his own path for his own gain. Yet, to his surprise, people kept thanking him. That reaction left him unsure of how to feel because he hadn't expected gratitude. Without saying much, Shizuku gently handed him a small box. She called it a token of her appreciation. Alan was caught off guard not just by the gift, but by the fact that Shizuku had been listening all along. When he opened the box, he found a necklace resting inside. It was a radiant gem that shimmered with the full spectrum of color like a rainbow frozen in crystal. Shizuku explained that it was a rare gemstone, something often used as a magical catalyst. Still, she admitted that the necklace alone couldn't possibly express the full extent of her gratitude. She then reminded Alan that even if his reasons were purely personal, his actions had led to something real. Because of him, she was able to reconnect with her family and with Akira. His motives didn't change the impact he had made. Alan let out a quiet laugh. Her words brought to mind something Ryugen had once said to him, and it was almost uncanny. The resemblance between the two was more than just blood, and it echoed in their thoughts. As the mood shifted, Shizuku asked him to keep looking out for her father and Akira. Alan's expression turned serious. He nodded, promising to do whatever he could. He then thanked her for the necklace, assuring her that he would treasure it and take good care of it. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Ray was still basking in the afterglow of the festival, exclaiming how amazing it had been. But before he could continue, a woman appeared behind him, calling him out for sneaking into town again. The young noble tried to brush it off with a smile, handing her a box of chocolates as a lighthearted peace offering. He promised they'd see each other again tomorrow. As he walked away, she stood still, surprised and silent, the box of chocolates resting gently in her hands. Alan flipped a medal into the air, unsure if it was called a Pramika medal. As he turned it over in his hand, Camille approached, greeting him with a casual good morning. She asked for a closer look at the medal, then questioned why he was wandering around when he had training. Alan explained that it was his break time, so he figured it was fine. As Camille examined the medal, her interest visibly piqued. Alan asked if she recognized it, and to his surprise, she did. So much so that she wondered why he didn't. She asked if it belonged to him, but before he could respond, Luca and Lazuli arrived, inviting them to join for tea. Camille lit up at the offer, while Alan couldn't help but feel a bit frustrated that the medal discussion had been cut short. Once they were seated, Camille's focus quickly shifted to the sweets on the table. Her eyes lit up as she curiously asked what kind of treats they were. Luca explained that the cookies were a gift from Alan, a small thank you for the help the girls had given him during the street festival. As they dug in, Camille pointed to a particularly odd-looking cookie and asked what animal it was meant to be. Alan blinked, surprised she couldn't tell it was a cat. Then again, in this world, cats were nothing like the ones he knew. Here they were wild and aggressive, not the soft, domestic creatures he was used to. Even so, the cookies were met with delight. The girls commented on how cute they were, almost too cute to eat, and couldn't ignore how soft and warm they felt to the touch. Alan, however, couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't quite belong. The cheerful energy around him only made his quiet awkwardness more obvious. Luca soon brought up the festival, saying she had heard it was a huge success. Alan confirmed it was, but admitted that the credit mostly went to one customer who bought everything. He explained that the medals he had were given to him by that very person, which left Camille skeptical. She insisted that couldn't be possible, but Alan stood by his story. Lazuli asked to see the medals, so Alan showed them the gold and silver Pramika medals. When he asked what they were exactly, Luca clarified that Pramika medals were used to access restricted areas. To demonstrate, she revealed her own dungeon access medal. Camille then added that Pramika medals were rare and only given to individuals recognized by the guild. They weren't easy to obtain. Lazuli was especially stunned to see a gold Pramika for the first time. Luca recalled that Camille had a silver promika, and Camille explained that hers only granted access to the school district. It allowed her to enter schools marked with the same crest as the medal. Based on Alan's medals, he had access to both the Royal Capital School District and N5 Magic Academy within it. As for the gold medal, it likely gave him entry to the Central District. Luca suggested he consult the Academy for confirmation, as someone had likely given him those medals as an invitation. With that, the puzzle pieces began falling into place for Alan. But the realization brought tension because he now had to meet Ray alone, the Marquise's heir. Before he could dwell too much on that, Luca suggested that Camille show him around, since she knew the school district well. Camille agreed, saying she owed him for the manga anyway. Just this once, she'd make an exception and act as his guide. Alan gratefully accepted the offer, feeling relieved to have someone with him on this next step of his journey. Later on, Camille and Alan arrived at the school district. Camille explained that it was the largest district in the royal capital, home not only to various schools but also to government-run research facilities. As she continued to chatter on, Alan quietly appreciated having her by his side. Amid their walk, Camille's focus shifted to the cold gift Alan had brought along. Without wasting time, she urged him to head toward the checkpoint. When they reached it, Alan presented his promika medals to the guard, leaving the man visibly stunned by what he saw. In an instant, the two were given permission to pass. Camille was dazed by the view, saying that it was nostalgic. Alan was just as amazed, thinking to himself that it felt like a completely different world. Just then, he spotted a majestic building nearby, and he asked Camille what it was. She explained that it was the Sandrique Theological School's Grand Cathedral, and it was the only religious school in the royal capital. Alan was intrigued by the idea of a religious school, so he asked what was being studied there. Camille simply replied that it was theology, but they also studied medicine, holy magic, and healing magic. Healing magic in particular required special training. She also shared that their vice captain, Nana, graduated from a religious school. Alan was surprised, while Camille went on to share that Nana could also use both healing magic and holy magic. People said that her reputation was even higher than the captain's, which Camille thought was impressive. Now that Alan had thought about it, he realized that he hadn't talked to the vice captains yet. Camille explained that they were both really busy. On top of that, Rafine hated men, so Alan should probably keep his distance. The mental image Alan had of Rafine scared him, so he made sure to keep that in mind. Just then, Alan turned the focus to Camille, asking her what school she went to. She shared that she went to Lyosol Magic School, a low-tier magic school that was made for commoners. Alan was surprised that she mentioned a low-tier school, which suggested there was a ranking system. Magic aptitude was inherited, so nobles went to higher-ranking magic schools. The N5 Academy that they were visiting today was a school for the elites. Even royalty went there. Alan now understood that this kingdom was basically built on a magic caste system. They refined strong bloodlines to produce stronger magic users, and that was how the kingdom of Cain Risa came to power. Not long after, the two reached their destination. Alan said it sounded unreal, and Camille agreed, saying it was a distant world for commoners like them. Just then, she pointed to the distance, saying they were almost there. Finally, they could see the N5 Magic Academy from afar. Alan was stunned, wondering to himself why everything was so huge. The school was basically a castle. Not long after, they approached the gates, and Alan told the guard that he had a promessa medal. He asked if his escort could enter too, and the guard permitted it. After that, the guard took Alan's right hand and put a special bracelet on him. Alan asked what it was, and the guard explained that it was a magical device meant for security measures. It was nothing personal. Camille added that it could alert the guards if he broke any rules, so she advised him to be careful. Alan was not amused, sarcastically asking if he had gone there just to commit crimes. Bro got hit with the congratulations. "You're on probation" bracelet. They soon entered the school grounds, and Camille was amazed. It was totally different from Lyosol. She then pointed to the famous Lion's Dormitory where the royal family had lived for generations. Alan was surprised, unable to believe that something that grand was a dormitory. As they continued their walk, Camille asked who exactly they were meeting. Alan explained that it was Ray Castellano, the customer at the street festival. Just then, Camille stopped in her tracks, prompting Alan to look back. He called out her name, but Camille only asked him to say the name again. Alan repeated Ray Castellano's name, adding that he was the heir to the House of Castellano. Camille closed her eyes, then out of nowhere ran away in a flash. Alan grabbed her hand before she could escape, but she squirmed and demanded to be let go. She asked why he was meeting a high-ranking noble, so Alan reminded her that he had already told her. Camille shivered at the thought that Castellano was one of the 3 great magic houses. If a commoner magician tried to meet them, that would be treason. Alan, on the other hand, tried to tell her that she was overreacting. However, Camille was still defiant, making it clear that she wasn't going to go. Suddenly, she stopped resisting and fell quiet. She told Alan that beside the Shishi dormitory, where the royal family resided, There were 3 other dorms, each belonging to one of the 3 magic noble houses. Since the Castellano family was part of the Owashi dormitory, that was where they should go. Alan was weirded out, but he thanked her anyway. Just then, Camille revealed the catch. Now that she had shown him the way, she asked if she could go home. Bro just got the tutorial, but his party member rage quit. However, Alan only reminded her that she didn't have a promika for this place, which might get her caught if she left. Camille was distraught, still refusing to meet the heir to a marquis family. At best, she would be meeting some knight or a low-ranking baron. Alan mentally said sorry to Camille, thinking he would just apologize properly later. Shortly after, they reached the Castellano family's home, where they were immediately greeted by a butler. The butler informed Alan that they had been expecting him, and that they should follow him. Ray was to return shortly, so they should wait for him in the meantime. And so, Alan and Camille waited for Ray. Alan noticed that Camille was looking pale, but she argued that she was fine. They both kept quiet for a while, but Alan soon noticed that Camille was acting unusually. He asked if she was sure about being okay, and Camille insisted she was. It was just that it felt like her soul was leaving her body for a second. It truly almost did. Suddenly the door opened, catching their attention. They got up and went to the door, seeing Ray in the flesh. Ray smiled at Alan and said it had been a while since the street festival. Alan bowed and thanked him for the invitation, but Ray insisted there was no need for formalities. He was the one who called him over, so he should just relax. Suddenly, a girl walked past Alan, stunning him for a moment. She stood right next to Ray and asked who the gentleman was. Ray chuckled and said he was his friend, which made Alan a little tense. The girl stared at Alan with her empty eyes, making him worry that he did something wrong. He was flustered, wondering why she was staring at him. Alan's in the "did I leave the stove on" stage of panic. He turned to Camille, hoping that she could help him out, but she was just useless at the moment. To get rid of the awkwardness, Alan handed the gift to Ray. Ray asked what it was, so Alan explained that it was a special dessert prepared for their meeting. Because of its delicate storage requirements, it wasn't usually sold in shops. Without wasting time, Ray clapped his hands to summon the butler. In an instant, the butler set up the table for them to enjoy Alan's delicacy. Alan was amazed, seeing how fast everything was set up. Just then, the butler asked if the delicacy had to be cut to pieces, but Alan said no, it was already individually portioned. Finally, Alan unveiled the delicacy. Ray's eyes widened with curiosity as Alan explained that it was called Akira. Based on Ray's reaction, Alan was convinced that the fruit tart was definitely the right choice. The girl, though, was still staring at him. Alan tried to redirect his attention by explaining to Ray that the dessert was best enjoyed cold. He suggested eating it before they start talking. He handed some tart to Camille, but it seemed like she was dying inside. After finishing the tart, Ray remembered that he was yet to introduce himself. He went on to say that he was Ray Castellano, and he was in his first year at the N5 Academy's middle school division. He then praised Alan, saying he was right about him. The tart was the best dessert he ever had. Hearing that, Alan was honored that he thought of him that way. Just then, Ray introduced his cousin, Chris Arisa, the girl from before. Noticing her silence, Ray asked Chris what was wrong. She was usually all cool and composed, but this was extreme. Just then, Chris told Ray to be quiet for a bit. Alan was amazed, witnessing how Chris casually spoke to the heir of a marquis family. Ray suddenly told Chris that lying wasn't good, then he mentioned that she had another name. Alan seemed confused, so Ray explained that commoners like him and Camille only had first names. However, Ray was a noble, so he had a family name as well. Chris, on the other hand, had even more than that. Suddenly, Alan was starstruck as Ray explained that he was in the presence of Chris Isekai'd, the princess of this kingdom. Alan couldn't believe that he was in front of a royal. Chris Isekai'd, if he remembered correctly, she was the second princess of this country. This made him wonder why she was in a place like this. Chris's father was from a family connected to the Castellano house. His magical power was on par with the head of the Castellano family. He was summoned to the royal family and married into royalty. In other words, despite being from a collateral royal line, Chris had a high claim to the throne. Ray went on to share that Chris was an awakened one of royal descent. Her magical power surpassed that of past kings. Alan asked what this meant, so Ray explained that awakened ones were those who exist among commoners like Alan. These were people who possessed enormous magical powers regardless of their bloodline. Ray thought of an example, then looked at Alan with a knowing face. He was pertaining to people like him. Man looked at Alan like, "It's you. You're the plot twist." Alan was stunned, but Ray continued speaking. The Zen religion called awakened ones divine children chosen by the creation of God. Yet Ray still wondered what the truth really was. Awakened ones had a sensitivity far removed from the general public. That was why Ray wanted to arrange for Chris to meet Alan this time. Alan kept quiet, only realizing that everything was set up. From what he had heard, the princess must be a reincarnated person too. In that case, it would be unwise to speak carelessly on his own. However, he couldn't remain silent when dealing with nobility either. He now wondered what he should do. Suddenly Chris spoke, telling Ray that being awakened didn't make the person special. She also reminded him that Alan was troubled by those unfounded suspicions. Ray tried to argue, but Chris cut him off, asking how it would affect him if the rumors about Alan were true. Reincarnated people were few in number, and even if they were strong, they were most at the level of a Viscount. She asked if that was right, but an awkward silence followed. Finally, Ray yielded, and he confirmed that Chris was right. He suddenly apologized to Alan, asking if he scared him. Alan reassured him that he didn't, but he remained vigilant, noticing that neither of them seemed like children. Suddenly, Ray mentioned that he had one more thing that he wanted to discuss. Alan asked what it was, so Ray informed him that he would like to regularly purchase goods from him in the future, things like the items from the street fair and the sweets they had earlier. In return, he would support him and his brigade. He asked Alan about his thoughts, and Alan thanked him and said he would be delighted to. However, this was only from his side, and he still had to check with the commander first. He hadn't told Sayonji anything yet. Ray reassured him that it was all right and that he would submit the paperwork to the commander. With that, Ray stood and thanked Alan for the meeting. He also gave his regards to the commander. As Ray and his guards left, Alan checked on Camille, calling out to her. Camille apologized, then she excused herself to get some fresh air. Meanwhile, Alan thought that she was safe after all. Now it was only Alan and Chris in the room. Chris broke the silence and asked Alan if he had a moment. Alan said yes, mentioning that he also wanted to talk to the princess. However, Chris remained silent and only stared at him. Alan was anxious, realizing how tough it was being alone with her. On top of that, she was still glaring at him. Suddenly, Chris asked if she could brush his bangs aside before they started the discussion. Despite his confusion, Alan lifted his bangs, revealing his entire face. Chris stuttered, making Alan more puzzled than ever. Her eyes lit up in excitement, saying he was Whitehorse Kyun from One Step. Whitehorse Kyun sounds like a discontinued Starbucks drink. She said he was cool, which confused Alan. She started to blush, saying that the more she looked, the more Alan looked like Whitehorse Kyun. Alan asked who that was, but Chris didn't answer and only told him to lift his bangs one more time. After that, she explained that Whitehorse Kyun was an idol who appeared in a social game called One Step. His name was Kazuhoshi Hakuba, and he was her favorite. Alan wanted to confirm if he looked like a character from a social game, but Chris made it clear that it wasn't just the resemblance. He was his reincarnation. Bro's about to get Isekai'd twice. Like Whitehorse Kyun, who used to be on the basketball team, Alan was tall with hair like golden threads and emerald eyes. Even their low voices were identical. Suddenly, Chris melancholically recalled that it had been a long journey, and it had been several years ago. Back then, Chris was formerly known as Yui Sakakibara, a second-year university student. There was a new costume gacha and event for Whitehorse Kyun around that time. However, she now wondered what to do since she was broke from the concert tickets. She needed to increase her part-time shifts, but this wouldn't allow her to grind the events. She fell silent for a while, then declared that she would quit university. Her friend was unfazed, merely saying that she never changed. On top of that, she was eating bean sprouts again. Her friend asked if she was okay, but Yui, with a proud face, boasted that it was a way to save money. Her friend made it clear that she wasn't praising her, though. She handed some fried chicken to Yui, and she thanked her for it. Chris's life revolved around her favorite idol. She cut corners in her daily life, but those days were fulfilling. However, one day that everyday life suddenly ended. Then she gained wealth, power, talent, and beauty, all in exchange for Whitehorse Kyun's existence. Since then, he had only existed in her heart. She cried as she thought about it, claiming that those days were painful. Alan, who witnessed her trauma dump, merely said that it must have been difficult. He didn't really get it, but he assumed she had been through a lot. Just then, Chris said that it was okay because she was now able to meet Whitehorse like this. Being sent to another world must be fate. This alarmed Alan, so he reminded her he was not Whitehorse. This didn't stop Chris, and she kept walking towards Alan. She suddenly grabbed him and slammed him on the wall, telling him to stay still. As Chris creepily came closer, Alan got worried that something weird had been triggered. Chris suddenly pinned him down and tied his hands, so Alan pleaded with her to stop, reminding her that a princess shouldn't be doing these kinds of things in such places. However, Chris reassured him that there was no need to worry, as she could easily suppress any rumors. Princess out here doing side quests in the 18+ category. Hearing this, Alan told her that the situation was not funny at all. Even though he was a reincarnated person too, he couldn't break free from her clutches. This made him wonder where Chris got all this strength. Desperate, Alan screamed for help, but Chris only revealed that the room was soundproof. She suddenly sat on top of him, telling him that he wouldn't be able to move either. In her past life, she didn't have any experience, but she had done a lot of studying. She then told Alan that if he could count the stains on the ceiling, it would be over soon, so he should just stop resisting. Alan prepared himself for what was to come, while Chris mustered all her courage. However, before Chris could do anything, Camille suddenly entered the room. Chris was caught in the act, sitting on top of Alan while undoing his buttons. As expected of Camille, she passed out at the mere sight of this. Camille saw that and her soul immediately hit the eject button. Chris suddenly bowed her head in apology, thinking that of all people she had lost her composure in front of her idol. She couldn't believe what she had done. Alan, on the other hand, questioned her choice of words. At any rate, Alan should be thankful to Camille. Who knew what could have happened if he were alone? Just then, Alan turned to the princess, wanting to talk to her about something. However, Chris cut him off, insisting on being called Sakakibara. There was no need for formalities in this situation, and that was an order. Having no choice, Alan said he understood. He addressed Chris as Sakakibara. Then he asked if she was reincarnated or transferred. From what she said earlier, it seemed like she was suddenly brought there. Chris replied that in her case it seemed like a possession. Only Sakakibara Yui's consciousness was sent to this world, and her memories and personality were synchronized with Chris's. Alan asked if it was like she had two separate personalities, but Chris said no. It was more like both consciousnesses merged to form her current personality. In other words, the kingdom's strongest otaku girl. That's what happened. Alan now understood, yet he was surprised. He had never heard of that pattern before. Chris didn't know the details either, and this was her first time meeting an awakened one. Given her position, she couldn't easily go outside. The people in this world were so good-looking that she got nervous just trying to talk to them. In the end, she was rumored to be weird and unsociable. Alan acknowledged her struggles. Then he went on to share that he had lived for 20 years, but he thought it was rare to meet an awakened one in everyday life. It might be different if one were an adventurer, especially someone from the same world. Chris agreed, thinking they were definitely different. Meanwhile, Alan decided that it was better to keep quiet about Sayonji for now. Just then, Camille, who was resting on Alan's lap, started to wake up. Chris quickly stood up, saying they had talked for a long time and that she was glad they had met that day. She also promised to send a letter of support to the brigade later. Not just for trading goods, but she would be happy to talk again as fellow Otherworlders. Alan agreed to it, making Chris smile. She said it was a promise, and she referred to Alan as White Horse Kyun. However, she quickly realized that she had made a mistake, and she asked for his name. Alan introduced himself, but he said Shinjo was fine too. Later on, Camille regained her consciousness. Alan was carrying her on his back, much to her confusion. She asked where she was, but Alan didn't answer, and was only glad that she had finally woken up. He asked how she was feeling and if she was unwell, but Camille reassured him she was fine. She tried to backtrack everything that happened. She remembered meeting Ray and the princess, then it struck her. When she returned to the room, the princess was on top of Alan. The thought of it still horrified her. Alan, on the other hand, was embarrassed that Camille still remembered everything. Just then, Alan asked her what she was talking about. He tried brainwashing her, suggesting that she had collapsed right after leaving the room. Alan's whole vibe is, if I say it confidently enough, it's canon. She must have had a strange dream. Camille fell silent, but she ultimately fell for it. She believed Alan, thinking that there was no way that could have happened. With that, Alan apologized for deceiving her. He didn't mean to push her to the point of collapsing. Camille could only wish that it had been a dream too. To make up for what he had done, Alan gave Camille the next volume of Yuma Koi. Camille burst with joy, hugging Alan as she forgave him. Alan, on the other hand, called her out for pulling his hair. Just then, he told her that if she were that energetic, then she could walk on her own. Camille refused, saying that if she didn't read Yuma Koi right away, she might faint again. Alan couldn't do anything about it, as Camille was his benefactor. This truly wasn't cheap. However, Camille overheard his complaints and she asked if he had said anything. Later on, they had finally returned to the guild. Alan thought it was tough back then, but things had been peaceful lately. Suddenly he was summoned by the commander, so he immediately went to see her. Upon entering her office, Sayonji immediately asked him what on earth he had done. Alan asked what she meant, so Sayonji rummaged through a pile of papers, revealing some letters from Chris and Ray. She had summoned Alan because of the letter of support from the second princess and the Marquis family. She asked if this was Alan's doing, and he replied that a lot had happened and it was a long story. Sayonji sighed, then she bluntly told him that all her plans had gone to waste because of him. Alan asked if he interfered, but Sayonji said no. In fact, she was rather grateful. She then asked Alan if he knew why she stopped working as an adventurer, but he said no. Sayonji went on to explain that she quit because, in order to operate in the royal capital, she needed connections, a stable supply of resources, securing blacksmiths, and more. All of those were difficult without social credibility. Alan was surprised to know that it applied to a brigade at their level, despite having strong members. Sayonji continued, explaining that in provincial cities it was enough to talk to the local lord. But even if you make a name elsewhere in the royal capital, you can be looked down upon just for being a woman. Actually, none of the nobles or trading companies she contacted were decent people. Back then, they asked a noble for his support, but he asked what was in it for him. Sayonji replied that they would pay him a portion of the funds that they would earn from their activities. However, the noble cut her off, saying that he wasn't in need of money and preferred something else. Sayonji asked what it was, and the nobleman revealed that he wanted her to become his mistress. If she didn't want to, any of her other female members would do. They did have quite a collection of pretty faces. Sayonji kept silent, but Rafin, her companion at the time, furiously called the nobleman a bastard. Sayonji calmed her down. Then she told the nobleman to pretend that this ever happened. She had no intention of selling herself or her comrades. As they stood up to leave, the nobleman called them insolent women. Sayonji remained composed and she left that room with her dignity intact. If audacity was currency, that nobleman would be Jeffrey Epstein. Hearing all of this, Alan couldn't help but feel terrible. Sayonji went on to say that they had similar experiences before, but this was the first time they had been treated with such disrespect. Alan asked if it had happened before, and Sayonji confirmed it, saying it was common not just in the royal capital. In the end, all men were like that. Judging by this, Alan assumed that Sayonji had been through a lot. Maybe that was why they naturally ended up with only female members. Alan fell silent, but Sayonji was quick to notice it. She suddenly apologized, saying that there were people like Alan too. She just got a bit whiny. However, Alan reassured her that it was only natural given what happened. Suddenly, Alan asked her about the name of the man she mentioned earlier. Sayonji revealed that it was Alex Byrne, the chairman of the Byrne Trading Company. Alan noticed that he had a family name, so he asked if he was a noble. Sayonji said he wasn't, but apparently he ingratiated himself with an impoverished knight family. Sayonji noted that the man usually ran a transport business connecting the royal capital and provincial cities, so she advised Alan to be careful. Alan made sure to keep that in mind. Just then he told Sayonji to get some rest, as he was noticing bags under her eyes. She didn't argue, and she reassured him she would. After that, they proceeded to work on some papers. As Alan helped, he noticed that the work had increased. He thought that they wouldn't need to look for connections anymore. Sayonji was about to explain, but she was cut off mid-sentence when Aina entered the room, informing her that there were a lot of people who wanted to meet with her. She suddenly noticed Alan, and she thought it was the perfect timing. Just then, Sayonji informed Aina that thanks to Alan, they were going to receive support from the Marquis family and the second princess. It seemed trading companies had heard the rumors and were flocking there. Aina was shocked, unable to believe the news about the Marquis family and the second princess. She couldn't wrap her head around the situation, so Alan tried to simplify it by saying that they just liked his goods. However, Aina argued that it was not the kind of acquaintance that he would make by chance. Sayonji felt sorry to ask this of Aina, but she wanted her to take care of the visitors. She told her to simply listen to what they had to say, and she would organize the information from there. Aina hesitatingly agreed, and before she left, she told Alan to explain everything to her later. Alan worriedly agreed, thinking to himself that he never thought it would come to this. Suddenly, Sayonji spoke, saying that Princess Chris didn't usually make public appearances. They were probably curious about her connection to the brigade. However, this worked in their favor. At this rate, they should quickly establish their operational base. When they restarted their adventuring business, she would need Alan's help too. Alan then asked what exactly she needed him to do. He volunteered to handle the procurement, but he was hesitant about other things. Sayonji explained to him that ideally she wanted him to be the brigade's exclusive merchant. Their team mainly focused on monster subjugation, so some requests could involve large sums of money if possible. She would like to sell materials without going through the guild. For now, they would maintain the status quo because they were still short on manpower and experience. She insisted on securing the personnel on their end, but this made Alan concerned as the workload might be too much for her. Sayonji reassured him she would be fine, and if anything, she was happy to be busy. Having no choice, Alan trusted her. Just then, Sayonji called out his name, reminding him that she had already told him before that being thanked for something he did for himself would throw him off balance. Alan recalled that she did say this. Sayonji continued, saying that for her, this was what adventuring work was about. It started to return to her original world, but now, it was a bit different. So, she would prioritize what was in front of her now. It was all for the sake of everyone who had been with her all this time. Alan smiled as he listened, acknowledging her thoughts. Sayonji then reassured Alan that there was no need to worry. After that, she asked him to go help Aina. Alan complied, thinking to himself that he should learn from this too. Later on, Aina and Alan had finally finished all their tasks. Aina complained that it was tough when people kept coming day after day. It made negotiations easier, but still. Just then, she turned to Alan, hinting that a certain someone still wouldn't give her the details. However, Alan only feigned innocence, and he said that was all there was to it. After that, Aina shared that they had narrowed down some promising trading companies, and they might make it in time for the regular meeting at this rate. Alan was intrigued about the regular meeting, so Aina explained that this was where squad leaders would give status reports periodically. There was an upcoming one next month. Aina shared that it was her first time attending, which somehow interested Alan. Until now, Aina was the only one in the supply squad, so she was excused. She couldn't manage it on her own. Alan acknowledged it, then he told Aina to prepare the accounting documents. She asked if he was sure, but then she realized that Alan was pretty accurate with calculations. If anything, it was his forte. Alan admitted that she was right, but when he noticed the pause in Aina's tone, he reminded her that he was not doing all the calculations himself. Aina shrugged that off and headed for the door, telling him that she was counting on him. When Alan was finally alone, he quickly used his powers to return to the real world, thinking that at times like these, modern conveniences were truly a blessing. In an instant, he returned to Japan, where a computer set was ready for him to finish his task faster. He mentally thanked Akira for doing half of the work, like teaching him how to use spreadsheet software and settings. Teleporting to Japan for Excel is the nerdiest flex in history. Just then, Alan turned his attention to the budget and he noticed that the expense was particularly high. He also noticed the maintenance cost for regular potions, which reminded him of something. He visited Japan regularly, and it wasn't just for product procurement, it was mainly to share information and help with gate research. However, it was difficult to maintain the gate for long periods and other magic couldn't be used. Instead, research on magical power was being conducted using otherworld materials he brought. As part of that, he brought in medicinal herbs and potions. He now planned to ask about it. At that moment, he called Akira over the phone and she promptly picked up. To his shock, Akira appeared behind him asking if he was calling for her. He stuttered, asking how long she had been there. Akira nonchalantly replied that she had just arrived, which made Alan think that he was being monitored. She was just too fast. In the Saionji Group top-secret research facility called Leaf, Yoshida, the chief plant researcher, greeted Alan. Alan apologized for the sudden visit, knowing he was busy. However, Yoshida was actually glad that he came as he wanted to report to him. He explained right away, revealing how the potion worked. The liquid penetrated the cell membrane, abnormally activating the nucleus and promoting cell proliferation. It also seemed to temporarily compensate for damaged areas, so wounds would heal faster. Alan asked Yoshida to explain in simpler terms, so the man elaborately said that the potion could dramatically enhance the natural healing ability that humans originally possessed to heal wounds. However, the genetic information of the medicinal herbs used as ingredients wasn't that different from Earth's plants, at least not enough to have such a dramatic effect on the human body. Alan suddenly cut Yoshida off, saying that it was not the power of the plants themselves. Yoshida confirmed he was right, and it seemed that the unknown energy called magical power was involved. They had expected this from Alan's physical examination. As Alan recalled all his tests, he remembered that he had set world records that exceeded the average human. If built different was a medical diagnosis, this is it. Just then, he realized that Saionji and Sakakibara were stronger than him. Yoshida noticed that Alan was lost in thought, so he asked if there was something wrong, but the young man said no. Just then, Yoshida mentioned that they had succeeded in cultivating some of the medicinal herbs, intriguing Alan. He realized that plants could be brought over alive, which was strange since they could pass through the gate. Despite the astonishing news, Yoshida revealed that their effectiveness was halved in this world. It was probably because there was less magical essence. Even so, if they could establish a cultivation method, it would be worthy of a Nobel Prize. As it stood, most of them would eventually die off. Alan guessed it was natural since they only grew in limited areas in the other world, and it seemed difficult to grow them. Just then, Yoshida mentioned that he was curious about the reverse case. He suddenly asked Alan if plants from this world could retain magical essence, and if they could, what effects would it have? Just then, their conversation was cut short when a woman named Tsukamoto entered the room, saying she had been called. Yoshida turned to Alan, telling him he had a request. He then told Tsukamoto to guide Alan. Not long after, Tsukamoto led Alan to Research Lab 3, which was filled with common earth plants. They gathered the ones with genes similar to the other world's medicinal herbs. Just then, Tsukamoto asked Alan to try infusing the plants with magical power, even just a little bit. Alan complied, though he disclosed that he had never done it before. He directed his palm towards a shelf filled with plants. Then he focused. As Yoshida expected, they couldn't see anything. Even Tsukamoto was disappointed at the outcome. Alan felt a bit sorry, but he definitely felt something. Now it only depended on the examination. After that, Tsukamoto thanked Alan for his participation and she told them that they'd let him know once the results came in. She also shared that, like the potion, there was a possibility that the magical essence would gradually dissipate, so they might ask him to use magic again several times. Alan was surprised, then he told her that he also had a request. Upon returning to Asfial, Alan immediately handed the financial statements to Aina. He also told her that the reports should be fine. As they walked to the regular meeting, Alan asked Aina if the event was that strict. Aina didn't know because it was her first time, and that was why she was frantically checking. Alan tried to calm her down, telling her not to worry because he would back her up if anything happened. He couldn't help but notice just how nervous she was, though. Suddenly, Aina said that she had been wondering about the luggage that Alan had been carrying. Alan asked if she was referring to what he was holding, then he told her that he would explain later. Aina glared at this, as he had never properly explained anything when he said he would. Alan smiled awkwardly, saying he had been explaining as much as he could. He walked forward, saying that he thought about it for the brigade's sake, so she shouldn't worry about that. Aina fell silent, noticing that he had changed a bit. Confused, Alan asked what she meant. At the meeting, Raffen, the vice commander, announced to everyone that she had completed gathering information about the dungeons around the royal capital. Several teams had been scheduled to challenge the dungeons the day after tomorrow. After that, the magic squad was called for their report. Nana, the leader of the magic squad, announced that ever since Alan joined, they had been getting lots of male adventurers wanting to join. However, none of them showed much promise, so they turned them all down. Alan was stunned to know this, as this had been happening without his knowledge. He felt kinda bad about it. Just then, Nana said that this was not exactly a replacement, but there was someone she would like to recommend. Sayonji asked who it was, and Nana revealed it to be Piana Ishan, who was from a knight family. She had a high aptitude for healing magic, and she should be ready in about 6 months. Sayonji keenly read Piana's information, then she admitted that she was the kind of talent they wanted. She was hesitant, but Nana reassured her it would be okay. She was the only one who noticed Piana's potential, so if they wanted to recruit her, now was the time. Sayonji yielded, trusting her comrade's words to be true. Piana's conditions could be the same as Nana's, and she wanted her to take care of it. Nana was overjoyed, saying that she understood. When Sayonji was about to call on the next reporter, Aina immediately stood up. Sis jumped up like her seat was on fire. She anxiously informed everyone that given the incident from yesterday, all negotiations for supplies had been settled. They had also secured the blacksmiths. Alan sat silently beside her, cheering her on. Sayonji acknowledged the report, then she asked if there was anything else. Aina stuttered, frantically flipping through her papers to come up with a response. The other brigade members told her it was okay, and that she should take her time. Alan, on the other hand, was reminded of the time when he was a company employee. He could definitely see that Aina was trying her best. Suddenly, Alan raised his hand, saying that there was one more thing he wanted to report. Sayonji asked what it was, so Alan told Aina to pass a certain item to everyone in the meeting. After reviewing the brigade's expenses, Alan found an issue with the maintenance costs of potions. Sayonji was surprised as she received the item from Alan. It was a new potion container he made using his connections. Compared to the conventional glass containers, this one was more durable, lighter, and less bulky. The most notable feature was the usable period. Due to special treatment, they could now be stored for about 4 times longer than usual, and they could be preserved for 1 month. For more details, everyone could just refer to the document. The brigade members were shocked, unable to believe that it could last for 1 month. They thought a week was the limit, and they doubted if they could trust the potion. It was too ridiculous, and there was no way it could last that long. Sayonji told everyone to be quiet, then she told them that she understood their doubts. However, did they really think he'd tell such an easily disprovable lie? One of the members wanted to argue, but Sayonji cut her off. She then announced to everyone that they could use the new potions alongside conventional potions for 1 month. The results should speak for themselves. Sayonji asked Alan if this was fine with him, and he agreed to it. Sayonji then told everyone that if there were no objections, then she would conclude the meeting. She also reminded everyone to share the information with their squad members. After the meeting, Alan headed to his room. He believed that the new invention should solve the potion maintenance cost issue, and he had to thank Yoshida and the others for it. Just then, he turned his attention to the rose before him. In his last visit to Japan, Tsukamoto informed him that, as a result of his cooperation, they statistically confirmed that roses could retain the most magical essence. While other plants showed toxicity harmful to humans, roses had effects similar to medicinal herbs. With that, they wanted Alan to cultivate the roses they had prepared in the other world. Alan acknowledged this, and he agreed to do the task. Tsukamoto insisted on preparing extra just in case. A few samples should be enough. This was the result. When Alan told Sayonji, she stopped him from reporting to the lab. However, he admitted that the mutation was probably his fault, given what he had done last time. He wondered if pouring in magic at full power would yield results faster. He couldn't just throw the rose away, so he thought about experimenting to see if it could substitute for medicinal herbs. Later on, Alan approached Mei, telling her that he wanted to learn how to make potions. He heard Mei knew a lot about it, and she quickly agreed to teach him. As she rummaged through her shelf, she told him that she probably didn't have much to teach. Just then, Alan told her that this time it was not about ordinary medicinal herbs, which confused Mei. Alan clarified that he was talking about pseudo-medicinal herbs. Then he showed her the roses he infused with magic. May was surprised, as she had never seen a plant like that before. She thought Alan was mysterious as ever, and he laughed awkwardly at that. After that, they proceeded to experiment with the roses. With a bit of tweaking, May expected the potion to work fine, but they should give it a try for now. She said sorry in advance in case it failed. Just then, May asked Alan how he knew about potions, but he clarified that he didn't know much, just the basics. With that, May explained briefly. First, potions come in 4 colors and 3 grades. There are 12 types in total. The lowest grade, green 3rd grade, could treat chapped skin and bruises. Purple could regenerate lost body parts, and the part could vary depending on the grade. Alan was surprised, not knowing it could do that much. May continued, saying that they only used up to blue, so they didn't deal with the others because they had Nana. Purple potions were considered rare in the market because the necessary herbs could only grow in dangerous places. They were quite scarce. Now that Alan thought about it, he had never seen them for sale. May explained that this was because it was the highest grade of potions humans could create. Alan suddenly asked about red potions, and May said they were now legendary. At least none had been found in over a decade. Also known as Ichor, or Blood of God, the effect of a 1st grade is resurrection or true revival, though there was no record of red 1st grade actually existing. However, even 2nd grade and below could heal fatal wounds, and they also had rejuvenating effects. Originally, it was one of the holy relics rarely found in high-difficulty dungeons, but now they might all have been fished out. Alan noticed that May had shed a tear as she said this, so he asked if she was okay. Just then, May stopped crying when she noticed that the potion had been completed. To their surprise, it was purple. Alan recalled that May said it was rare, and she confirmed it, adding that it was her first time creating one. Alan asked how much it was worth, and May replied that in the black market it would sell for 500,000 gold. It took a while for that to sink in, but it eventually shocked Alan. Later on, they presented the potion to Sayonji. Sayonji said Alan was mind-blowing, but in a good way. Just then, Alan shared that he was expecting it to be about blue potion level. Aina chimed in, saying that normally artificial cultivation of medicinal herbs was impossible. She believed that Alan shouldn't release it into the market as an individual, as it would definitely cause a commotion. However, they couldn't waste it either, so she recommended selling it to the guild. Sayonji said it was the opposite. Releasing something this valuable through the guild would be bad for the brigade's external reputation. Alan seemed confused, so Sayonji explained that they could do proper business without going through the guild. Not just competitors, but even guild staff would think that deep down. Soon, Alan would be the one affected by it. Alan agreed that it would indeed be troublesome. Sayonji thought this was perfect though. She tasked Alan to go to the black market as a social study. The capital's black market wasn't illegal. Alan was hesitant, but Sayonji reassured him that there was no need to hide the team's name. If he were worried about causing trouble, he wouldn't be able to operate. Alan was surprised, and he couldn't believe that Sayonji was actually a high school girl. She was more mature than he was. Sayonji then told Alan and Aina to keep it a secret from the other team members. She also wanted Aina to accompany Alan, which somehow her. Sayonji reminded Aina that if they could sell it, they could make a deal worth 5 million. How was Aina going to handle it when she, the person in charge, was absent? Aina sulked, having no choice but to agree. With that, Sayonji left the room, leaving everything to the two. Just then, Alan remembered that he had forgotten to ask Sayonji about what to do with the roses for the remaining potions. Aina asked what was wrong, but Alan said it was nothing. That night, Alan created more potions from the roses. He was still amazed, thinking it could be worth 5 million. He couldn't tell May the details about the magic roses, so he had to make the remaining potions himself. He used up all the remaining roses, which were about 50, and he wondered if that was okay. He had to get it ready for tomorrow's black market, so he had no choice but to believe. Shortly after, he poured some of the potion into a test tube, but he was confused when it turned red in color. The amount had decreased quite a bit, making him wonder if he had failed. There was no way it could be a red potion, and he was convinced it was a reddish purple. There was a tingling sensation, but it was not evaporating. Alan was more confused than ever. It was clearly different from purple, and if it were discovered, it would undoubtedly become a huge problem. The water purification facilities weren't adequate, so who knew what would happen if he poured it out? If he just dumped it somewhere and it was found, it could endanger everyone. In that case, it was time for the last resort. He would bury it in uncharted territory. Alan quickly used his magic to teleport into a world of nothingness. He stepped into the barren land thinking it was perfect. He planned to hide it and get out. Just then, he gazed into the sky and saw a strong beam of light coming from a giant spacecraft. He thought it was some kind of space elevator, which only meant it was absolutely no good. With that, Alan left the place and went somewhere else. Eventually, he settled in a prehistoric location, the land of the dinosaurs. There, he decided to bury it with the bottle. If Jurassic Park 5 has mutant T-Rexes, we know who to blame. The next morning, dark circles formed under Alan's eyes. Aina noticed he was out of it, so she asked if he was all right and if he lacked sleep. Alan quickly used that excuse, saying he had a bit of trouble falling asleep. Aina asked if he was too nervous to sleep, but Alan, who was barely awake, didn't answer and only asked who was there. Aina finally confirmed that this man was indeed half asleep. Alan apologized, but Aina understood. She was part support staff, part adventurer. The black market in the royal capital was supposed to have relatively decent security, but in Alan's case, he had connections with the princess and even made purple potions. She told him to still take precautions, as she assumed that he didn't have any combat experience. Alan apologized for that and he thought about doing some training next time. However, Aina told him to relax as she would protect him properly. She then headed for the door, urging him to hurry up, or they would be late. Meanwhile, Alan was surprised because Aina really believed he couldn't sleep because of nervousness. Just then, he remembered that he had to switch gears too. He promptly followed Aina, telling her he was coming. Not long after, they arrived at the royal capital's black market. Alan had just finished the preparations, which was simply setting up their booth. He simply placed the purple potion there along with the appraisal certificate, as he didn't have anything else to sell anyway. Still, he thought the black market would be more sinister. Hearing that, Aina reminded him that the commander already told him that the black market wasn't actually illegal. It was just a market not managed by the country or the guild. The goods were all legitimate. Still, they needed to be careful. When Alan asked why, Aina explained that one could sell for several times the guild's price, but that meant customers were desperate too. Even if they haggled you down, you wouldn't be charged with a crime. Alan sarcastically asked if he looked like someone who would give in to haggling, but Aina said no. Still, everything she said was true. Just then, Alan shifted the topic, saying that it was almost time for the opening. As soon as shops opened for business, the place suddenly turned chaotic. People ran in all directions, while some argued and pushed each other. Even Alan and Aina were shocked by how fast people ran before them. Alan asked if the black market was always like that, but Aina said no. There were clearly too many people. She wondered if there was something rare being sold, while Alan was starting to get a bit worried. They both hoped they could leave early. Moments later, a man approached their shop asking if the potion was the real deal. Alan confirmed it, asking the man if he could see the appraisal certificate. Still, the man was skeptical, arguing that anyone could forge something like that. Just then, the man offered 1.3 million for the potion, but Alan said that his offer was the price for a first-grade blue potion. It was clearly impossible. As Alan had expected, these customers really were like this. He was bound to be interrogated about the red and purple potions. Suddenly, the man noticed Aina, so he rudely called out to her and asked why she was letting Alan do all the talking. Aina bluntly told the man that he was noisy, and if he wasn't buying, then he should go somewhere else. Dumbfounded, the man started to get angry, but Aina only told him to shut up. If he wasn't buying, then he should leave their shop because he was interfering with their business. The man furiously asked what she said, clearly baffled that a woman dared to speak to him that way. He lifted his heavy hand, prepared to slap some sense into Aina. However, Alan caught his hand, telling him he was going too far. The man told Alan to shut up, saying he was talking to the woman. Then, out of nowhere, a powerful punch landed on the man's face, stunning Alan as he watched everything unfold. The man was sent hurling into the streets, shocking Alan and a few other bystanders. Even Aina was surprised by what she did. Alan advised her to be more careful in the future, and Aina embarrassingly agreed. She was horrified by the thought that an adventurer like her raised a hand on a civilian. Sensing her regret, Alan told her that from now on she could leave situations like that to him. She turned civilian into civilian casualty. Aina sulked in misery, muttering that the demand for the potion was high, yet no one decided to buy it on the spot. She seemed lost in thought, so Alan decided to leave her alone for a while. Suddenly, someone approached the shop and he was somewhat interested in the guild's appraisal certificate. An adventurer told Alan that he wanted to buy the purple potion. Alan stuttered and thanked him, relieved that someone had decided to buy it right away. Suddenly, the adventurer asked Alan how he acquired the potion, and he replied that he used various connections. Hearing that, the adventurer asked if there was a possibility of restocking, but Alan didn't make any promises about it. Just then, the adventurer gave Alan his contact information and he introduced himself as Maxwell. He told Alan that if he restocked, he would like the potion to be sold to him. If he brought it to the guild, they would handle the purchase and he wouldn't mind paying whatever price he asked. Alan took the card, stuttering as he said he understood. Alan asked Maxwell if he was sure, though he disclosed he didn't plan to charge exorbitant prices. Maxwell reassured him that it wasn't a problem. Potions themselves were subject to large price fluctuations, and if monsters suddenly increased or conflicts arose, the price could double. However, purple potions were rarely put up for sale, maybe once a month at best. Many adventurers quit because they couldn't heal their injuries. Just then, Alan asked if regenerative treatment was difficult even for healing magic users. He assumed that there weren't many healing magic users to begin with. Maxwell replied that there were some who could do it, but you could count them on one hand. It was impossible for an average adventurer to hire one. That was why Maxwell said he would pay any price. If money could overcome the impossible, it was cheap. With the potion, he could also treat his comrade. Last month, one of them lost a finger and they needed to cut off the affected area again and apply some potion. That was why Maxwell wanted to keep it in stock as much as possible, and he counted on Alan for it. Meanwhile, Alan stuttered as he acknowledged his words. Maxwell then said he was lucky that day. Suddenly, he noticed that the nearby street was overflowing with people. Now that Alan had thought of it, he wondered if something was happening that day. Maxwell then shared that elf slaves were being brought in that day, though he didn't know the details. Hearing that, Alan was intrigued. After selling the potion, Alan and Aina looked around, as they were there for a social study too. Alan followed, though he wondered if it was okay. As Alan looked around, he noticed some slaves waiting to be bought. He didn't know the country had a slave system, which was different from what he had imagined. However, Aina told him it was on a small scale. Alan noticed the paper the slaves were holding, so he asked Aina about it. Aina explained that it was a document listing salary and job conditions, and it also included contract periods and qualifications. Alan was shocked to know that slaves were paid, and they could even choose their jobs. Slavery, but make it corporate. Aina was shocked at his reaction, and she asked what country he was from. She then explained that the people who came to their country weren't those who became slaves due to debt or crime. That was why both parties needed to agree to a contract. The advantage for employers was that they could place secrecy and behavior restriction magic on their slaves. It was like having a servant bound by a contract. However, most of the work was tough unless they had some special skills. Just then, Alan asked if elf slaves were rare and Aina confirmed it. She wouldn't be surprised if one cost 10 million a month. Alan was now lost in thought, thinking about the elves who came to the black market by themselves. And most importantly, why did they? Just then, they came across a huge crowd. Alan said there were a lot of people, while Aina complained about not being able to see what was ahead. Alan turned to Aina, telling her to be careful not to get separated. Meanwhile, Aina freaked out, seeing that he was being swept away by the crowd as he said that. She tried to go after him, but the crowd was stronger than her. After a while, she finally caught up to Alan, but now they were both stuck. They got swept quite far, and they didn't even know where they were. As Alan struggled, he noticed that Aina seemed entranced by the figure before her. When Alan turned to look, he saw a mysterious elf on a podium reading a book as she ignored the large crowd. Alan was dazed, and Aina said that the elf was beautiful. Alan suddenly noticed a framed paper, assuming it was a list of conditions. The elf had no salary preference, contract period, or work content. As Alan read, he was intrigued by the last item on the list. The elf was looking for a buyer with 1 red potion, 3rd grade or higher. As Aina and Alan left the place, the bystanders whispered that the elf's companion was around and they were seriously injured. The elf was traveling around to save them, and it was a touching story. However, they wondered if it was worth a red potion. That was why her conditions were like that, and maybe the elf would make it worth it for the buyer. As Alan listened, he was convinced that the red potion might be worth more. But that wasn't it, and it wasn't about that. Alan thought it wasn't a fair exchange, it was just a sacrifice. At this rate, that child would be in danger. However, Alan might be able to make a red potion. If only he could do it. Just then, Aina checked in on him, noticing that he suddenly stopped. Alan apologized, as he was just thinking. Aina asked if he was concerned about the elf, but Alan frantically denied it. Aina fell silent for a moment. Then she told Alan that if he sympathizes with everyone, he wouldn't last. She advised him to save his compassion for those he could actually help. She asked if he got it, but Alan was too stunned to speak. He then thanked her, admiring her for occasionally saying something good. Aina replied that he said one word too many and that she was different. She quickly resumed walking, telling Alan that they should head back. Alan thought that Aina probably meant it differently, but in a way she pushed forward. He could use a tight-lipped employee anyway, especially in repacking and sorting goods. This might just be an opportunity for him. It wasn't like him to want to help, but if there was a possibility, it was worth trying. Later on, Alan returned to Japan, where he visited the old man who once offered him lunch. The man was surprised to see him, while Alan apologized for visiting so suddenly. The old man reassured him it was fine, then he invited Alan inside. Shortly after, the old man brought some tea, telling Alan that it had been a while. He asked if he wanted to stay over for dinner, and he had just harvested some eggplants. Alan brimmed with excitement and asked if it was okay, though he was quickly embarrassed by it. Suddenly, he sat formally, causing the old man to ask why he was doing that. With a serious tone, he told the old man that he had something to ask of him. That is all till chapter 10.3. Please view the comment below.